For a brief moment in history, one nation believed it had outsmarted money itself, not by finding gold, not by conquering silver, but by turning raw industrial metal into currency, convincing its people that value did not need to be rare, light, or beautiful, only official. In 17th century Sweden, money became heavy, literally heavy, so heavy that people carried their wealth in carts, stored their savings on warehouse floors, and measured prosperity not by numbers in an account, but by the weight of copper stacked against a wall. At first, it seemed ingenious, even inevitable, a solution perfectly tailored to a nation overflowing with metal and starving for power, and for a short time it appeared to work. Trade continued, wages were paid, and confidence held. But beneath that confidence, something fragile was forming, something most people could not see, because when money feels solid, when it has weight and substance, people stop questioning it. This is Empire Economics, and on this channel we explore the economic systems, financial experiments, and monetary decisions that built nations, distorted reality, and quietly set the stage for collapse, often long before anyone realized what was happening. Because this is the story of the economy that tried to print stability out of metal, the system that replaced scarcity with mass, and the moment an entire nation discovered that even the heaviest money in the world can become dangerously light. This is the story of Sweden's copper money and how an economy built on weight slowly sank under its own value. 17th century Sweden was not poor in the way many nations were poor, because it did not lack land or labor or ambition. But it suffered from a far more dangerous imbalance, one that would quietly shape every economic decision it made, because Sweden had something most countries dreamed of and yet could not easily use. It had copper, vast amounts of it, pulled from the earth in quantities unmatched anywhere in Europe, fueling cannons, tools, and trade, while at the same time lacking the gold and silver that defined real monetary power in the early modern world. The metals that moved across borders, settled debts, and commanded trust. Gold and silver flowed toward empires, toward kings with colonies and conquest, while Sweden, isolated and still emerging, watched its copper pile higher and higher, valuable in theory, but inconvenient in practice, heavy to transport, difficult to trade internationally, and increasingly detached from the systems that governed European finance. This imbalance created a quiet pressure inside the Swedish state because wars had to be fought, soldiers had to be paid, and governments could not function on metal that no one wanted to accept at face value, especially when foreign merchants demanded silver, not promises backed by weight. And so Sweden faced a question that every ambitious economy eventually confronts, whether to accept its limitations and grow slowly or attempt to engineer a shortcut, a way to turn what it had in abundance into what it desperately needed, without waiting for the world to approve. Copper, after all, was real, it was tangible, it was everywhere, and to Swedish policymakers it felt almost absurd that value should be dictated by scarcity rather than substance, by shine rather than utility, and this belief began to harden into something far more dangerous than optimism. If money was simply a shared agreement, then why couldn't that agreement be rewritten? And if the state declared copper money, officially, universally, and without exception, then perhaps weight itself could replace trust, and quantity could replace rarity. It was an idea born not from madness, but from logic stretched just far enough to snap, and once that idea took hold, Sweden was already moving toward an experiment that would redefine money, burden its people, and reveal how easily practicality can disguise risk when necessity is involved. The decision to turn copper into official money did not arrive suddenly, nor did it feel radical at first, because from the state's perspective, it seemed less like invention and more like efficiency, a way to formalize what already existed in overwhelming quantity and put it to work. Instead of minting small coins with modest copper content, Sweden began producing massive copper plates, each stamped with royal seals and fixed denominations, some weighing several kilograms, others so large and heavy that a single payment could require multiple people to move it. These plates were not symbolic, they were literal slabs of metal, meant to remove doubt entirely, because no one could question their authenticity, no one could shave them down unnoticed, and no one could claim they were imaginary wealth when the value sat visibly in front of them. For the government, this solved several problems at once, allowing copper to be absorbed into circulation, reducing dependence on scarce silver, and creating a domestic currency that could not easily leave the country, because transporting large quantities of plate money across borders was impractical and expensive. At first, the system felt reassuring. Wages were paid on time, taxes were collected efficiently, and everyday transactions continued with little disruption because people trusted what they could see, touch, and weigh, even if it made commerce slower and more cumbersome. Merchants adapted, households reorganized, and storage rooms replaced purses, while banks and officials assured the public that this was not an experiment, but a refinement, a uniquely Swedish solution to a uniquely Swedish problem. Yet buried inside this solution was a quiet contradiction, because by tying money directly to copper supply, Sweden had created a system where value expanded not with productivity or trade, but with extraction. And once that connection was made, the future of the economy became inseparable from the pressure to produce more metal. Copper had solved scarcity, but it had also removed restraint, and without realizing it, Sweden had crossed the line between using money as a tool and allowing money itself to dictate the direction of the nation. As copper plate money spread through Swedish society, its weight began to reshape daily life in ways that were subtle at first, then increasingly impossible to ignore. Because money was no longer something that moved easily with people, it was something people had to organize themselves around. Wages were sometimes delivered by cart, not by hand, and large payments required witnesses, laborers, and storage space, turning ordinary transactions into logistical events that demanded time, effort, and planning. Homes adapted, with reinforced floors and locked rooms dedicated not to goods but to currency itself, while merchants built counting houses designed less for speed and more for security, because once money became immobile, theft became catastrophic rather than inconvenient. For rural communities, the system felt both stabilizing and oppressive, as copper money kept value circulating locally, but also trapped wealth within regions, making it harder to respond to shortages, relocate capital, or react quickly to changing conditions. The state, meanwhile, viewed this immobility as a feature rather than a flaw, because money that could not easily flee the country was money that could be taxed, monitored, and controlled, reinforcing the belief that Sweden had finally created a currency that served national interests first. Yet this control came at a cost, because flexibility vanished and markets slowed as traders hesitated to engage in deals that required physical effort disproportionate to profit, quietly reducing economic momentum beneath the surface. Confidence remained, but it became dependent on routine rather than trust, on habit rather than belief, and as long as the plates continued to arrive, stamped and sanctioned, few questioned whether the system could adapt to stress. In making money solid and immovable, Sweden had stabilized value in the present, but it had also anchored its economy to a form of currency that resisted change, innovation, and speed, leaving it increasingly vulnerable to forces it could not lift or move. For years, Sweden's copper money appeared to do exactly what it was designed to do, because prices remained steady, wages were predictable, and the economy avoided the sudden shocks that plagued silver-based systems across Europe. Officials pointed to this stability as proof that the system was not merely functional, but superior, a model of discipline in a chaotic financial world where speculation, debasement, and currency shortages routinely undermined trust. But stability can be deceptive, especially when it is enforced rather than earned, because beneath the surface, the economy was becoming increasingly rigid, locked into patterns that could not easily respond to change. Copper production dictated monetary supply, meaning that every new discovery, every increase in output, quietly expanded the amount of money in circulation, regardless of whether the economy needed it. At the same time, international trade exposed the system's weakness, as foreign merchants discounted Swedish money, demanded silver premiums, or refused copper altogether, forcing the state to intervene to preserve confidence. To maintain the illusion, authorities adjusted official valuations, redefined exchange rates, and reassured the public that copper money was fully reliable, even as its usefulness beyond Sweden's borders steadily declined. Inside the country, people adapted rather than resisted because money still worked locally, and as long as daily life continued, few questioned whether the system was drifting away from reality. Yet this calm depended entirely on belief, not flexibility, and the longer it lasted, the more fragile it became, because an economy that cannot bend eventually breaks, no matter how solid its money appears. The moment the system began to strain was not marked by panic or collapse, but by a quiet shift in behavior, because people started noticing that copper was becoming easier to find, yet harder to trust. Mines expanded production to meet demand, but each increase added more money into circulation, slowly weakening the connection between effort, value, and reward, even as official prices insisted nothing had changed. Merchants began raising prices not out of greed but caution, anticipating future instability, while workers demanded higher wages simply to keep pace with rising costs that the state refused to acknowledge. Internationally, Sweden's position weakened further, as foreign buyers demanded payment in silver, forcing the government to exchange copper at unfavorable rates just to maintain trade flows. To compensate, officials issued reassurances, adjusted exchange tables, and emphasized order over flexibility, believing that confidence could be preserved through authority rather than adaptation. But money systems do not fail when people stop believing suddenly. They fail when belief becomes effortful, when trust requires explanation instead of instinct. As copper piled up in vaults and warehouses, the economy grew heavier, slower, and more resistant to movement, signaling that the very thing designed to create stability was now applying pressure from within. Sweden had not yet reached collapse, but it had reached a point where every additional plate of copper increased risk instead of strength, and the system began drifting toward a breaking point it could no longer avoid. The breaking moment did not arrive as a single event, but as a realization, spreading quietly through markets, households, and institutions, that the system could no longer support its own weight. Copper continued to flow from the mines, but instead of strengthening the economy, each new shipment deepened the imbalance, increasing supply without increasing confidence. Prices began drifting upward despite official controls, and the state found itself fighting arithmetic rather than managing policy, because no decree could force money to be scarce once abundance had been normalized. Banks and merchants reduced exposure, delaying transactions and demanding safer terms, while ordinary people hesitated, sensing that something fundamental had shifted, even if no one could yet explain it clearly. Foreign trade strained further, draining silver reserves faster than expected and forcing the government into defensive measures that revealed vulnerability instead of strength. Attempts to stabilize the system only exposed its rigidity because adjustments came slowly, while economic pressure moved relentlessly forward. By the time officials acknowledged the depth of the problem, the damage was already embedded in the structure of the economy, and reversing course required admitting that the solution itself had become the threat. What had once been a symbol of control now represented excess, and the weight of Sweden's money, both literal and economic, was finally pulling the system apart. When the system finally began to unwind, it did not collapse into chaos overnight, but instead entered a long, uncomfortable retreat, as authorities were forced to confront the reality that copper money could no longer anchor the economy it once stabilized. The state reduced official valuations, acknowledged losses, and quietly shifted policy away from rigid control toward damage limitation, knowing that a full reversal would shatter what little confidence remained. For ordinary people, the consequences were uneven and deeply personal, as savings lost value, wages lagged behind prices, and trust in economic promises weakened in ways that would take generations to rebuild. Merchants adapted by shrinking operations, limiting exposure, and relying more heavily on foreign currencies whenever possible, further reducing the role copper played in meaningful trade. The government itself absorbed massive losses, having guaranteed a system that now required ongoing intervention simply to function, tying public finances to a monetary structure that resisted repair. What made the aftermath particularly damaging was not just the financial cost, but the psychological shift, as people learned that stability enforced from above could dissolve just as quietly as it had been imposed. Sweden did not collapse as a state, but it emerged altered, more cautious, and less willing to believe that control alone could substitute for adaptability in complex economic systems. The copper experiment faded not with a crash, but with exhaustion, leaving behind a lesson written not in panic, but in prolonged strain and gradual retreat. The reason this story matters is not because Sweden failed, but because it almost succeeded, and in doing so revealed how fragile even the most carefully designed economic systems can become when copied without restraint. The copper standard worked in its original context, where scarcity, geography, and discipline aligned. But once others attempted to replicate the model without those constraints, its strengths transformed into weaknesses. Stability created confidence, confidence encouraged expansion, and expansion quietly eroded the very conditions that made stability possible in the first place. This pattern appears repeatedly throughout history, whenever a solution to one era's problem becomes a template applied too broadly, too mechanically, and too confidently. Money systems are not formulas. They are relationships built on trust, behavior, and limits. And when those limits are ignored, even the most solid currency begins to hollow out from within. Sweden's copper economy reminds us that success can be more dangerous than failure because it invites imitation without understanding, repetition without restraint, and belief without flexibility. What ultimately failed was not copper, but the assumption that control could replace adaptation and that stability could be frozen in place without consequence. This is why economic history does not move in straight lines, but in cycles, repeating lessons for those willing to recognize them before the weight becomes too heavy to carry again. The Swedish copper economy did not fail because it was foolish or reckless or poorly designed, but because it worked so well that people forgot why it worked in the first place. It delivered stability in a world of chaos, control in an age of uncertainty, and for a time, it solved problems that silver and gold could not. But when success became a blueprint instead of a balance, the system lost the flexibility it needed to survive change. This is the danger hidden inside every economic miracle, because once everyone copies it, scarcity disappears, discipline fades, and confidence slowly turns into weight. History does not punish innovation, it punishes imitation without understanding. And this is why economies that seem unbreakable often fail quietly, not in flames, but under the pressure of their own success.